Welcome back, everyone. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a few things that might not be totally obvious when you first set up a website and you've got a domain name and you're excited and you are running your website. In this example, I'm going to be talking about running a WordPress site, but a lot of the things that we'll talk about would apply to other content management systems as well. But WordPress, of course, is one of the most popular. We're going to be talking about getting the most out of your business email. So, what that means and what it means for you, we will get into. So, let's jump right in. So, rule number 0, I'll say it's a bit of a confession. For years, I've tried to get off of email. I think there are so many better communication methods out there these days. Email can be frustrating. It can take forever to empty your inbox, particularly if you're working in an office or in some sort of knowledge work capacity. Email can be distracting, or it could even be addictive. And, you could be just going through your email and not getting a lot of other work done. But I think you can use email more strategically and use it to your benefit, particularly if you're managing multiple websites or have multiple domain names. So that's what we'll talk about here. All right, so the first question is what is business email? What's the difference between business email and what I would call personal email? So, business email would be an email address that uses your custom domain name for your business. A personal email or a free email would be something you'd get for free, like Gmail or Hotmail or AOL or Proton or one of these other email services. Some examples I have here, like a business email would be like joe@joescrabshack.com. A free email would be, joeycrabeater4928 at gmail.com. So basically, business email, it's considered more professional and it's more unique. It's more specific to your business, but you usually have to pay for it. Sometimes it'll be included in your web hosting, or in some cases, third-party private email hosting. And honestly, I would recommend opting for business email if you have any business of any kind. So let's say, for example, you are submitting a proposal or a bid for a contract or something, and the people who are approving it are going to be reviewing this, and they see that your contact information, you don't have a website or a domain name, and your email is just like a generic Gmail address, or if it's something, like Joey Crab Eater, something that is kind of personal to you, they might look at that and see that as a sign that maybe you're not legit, or you're not like an actual company or something like that. Some people may not care, they may not notice, but if you want to take that risk, it's up to you. So it depends on how you want to do that. But I would say if you have a website and you have a custom domain, there's no reason not to set up a business email. Even if you don't have private email hosting, we'll talk about ways you could still use your domain to receive email at any address that you set up. But what I will recommend pretty conclusively is that it's probably the best strategy to try and get as much of your email communication as possible into as few inboxes as possible. And we'll talk about different ways you can do that as we proceed through here. All right, so one thing I'll say, rule number 1, in my opinion, don't use your web host for your email hosting for your business email or your custom domain. Basically, because your host kind of treats email as an add-on, and that's not to say that it's not important to them, or it's like not treated as important. It's still important, but it's not going to be as reliable as like some dedicated email hosting options out there. And the default email client, the program that they'll give you to check your webmail, they're not always the best. So what you'll end up doing is either forwarding that email or setting up, for example, in your Gmail, another inbox for your business email. You'll add it, using the email settings that your host gives you, and basically, it's not always the best option. An example of dedicated email hosting would be something like Google Workspace. It's a little pricey, and of course, a lot of people have issues with Google, like legitimate issues regarding privacy and things like that. But in terms of the security and the interface, you've got the two-factor authentication and everything. it's a good option for having your dedicated business hosting. And for another reason, it's more likely over the years, I think, that you will switch web hosts, and it's kind of a pain to migrate your email each time you do that. So across the whole spectrum, I would say it's worked the best for me to have the domain hosted or registered rather at a specific registrar, the web hosting on a totally different host, and the email hosting in a separate place. So that way I can switch web hosts all I want. I never have to worry about the domain or the email, because typically I've tried a lot of different hosts over the years, more so than I've tried different email hosts and registrars. So a good rule of thumb, you can separate these things and it should make them easier to manage for you. All right, so rule number 2, I'll say use forwarders. So they're usually free and you can set them up at the domain registrar. If your host gives you a cPanel, your web host, there are forwarding options in there as well. But again, if you switch hosts, why bother having to move those if you can set them up at the registrar and then you never have to touch them? And with a lot of domain registrars, it's free. So again, to use our Joe's Crab Shack example, you could have an email for Joe at Joe's Crab Shack that forwards right to your Gmail. So you don't have to pay for expensive email hosting unless you want to reply as Joe from Joe's Crab Shack, which you probably would want to do. You wouldn't be able to do that with a forwarder. You might be able to trick it, like in a way, like set a reply to address for Joe at Joe's Crab Shack, or maybe you can fake it. I've never really tried that, but the advantage of that is you can have forwarders for all kinds of different purposes. So, for example, let's say you also register the domain and have a separate website for crabfancymagazine.com or something like that. You don't have to set up an email hosting mailbox for crabfancymagazine.com. You can just simply set up a forwarder. So, for example, if you have an email at your registrar, you can go to where you have crabfancymagazine.com registered, set up an email forwarder for admin. So that would be an actual address. If somebody emailed admin at crabfancymagazine.com, it would forward to Joe at Joe's Crab Shack or to your Gmail. And think of the relevance of that. If you have different websites for different purposes, you can filter emails based on the domains. So, for example, if you sign up, at a yoga studio or for a streaming service, or you want to get a free PDF or something, you can have an actual address just for those types of things. And then in your main inbox in your client, you can actually set up a filter for a specific email. So if something comes in from that email address, you can just filter it, and you can have that for as many domains and as many email addresses on those domains as you want. So it's a good little tip. It's a good little thing to think about as far as how you're managing all of these different domains and email addresses. You don't, I think, want to have a lot of webmail inboxes for all of these, even if your host provides them for free, when you can actually have everything go to one place. All right, so now things get a little more interesting. So we're going to talk about some specific WordPress specific options for using your professional business email strategically. So WordPress can do some interesting things with email. It has a lot of functionality built in for that. But first, we'll talk about the two different types of email with regard to WordPress. As I put here, you can transact and market with your email in WordPress, or sometimes both, as we'll talk about. On the transact side, transactional email, that is basically one-off single user communications like password resets or system notifications. Basically, anytime WordPress sends information about the site or an event or some sort of action that took place on the site, and sends that to a single email address. So that's transactional email. Sort of rule number 3, I'll just say don't let yourself get locked out of WordPress, because the way it works is when you first install WordPress, let's say you go through a conventional web host, usually they will have set up some sort of default SMTP configuration, so that if you got locked out of your site You can request a password reset and the email will go out, and very likely it will actually hit your mailbox without you having to have configured it. But what if that email doesn't come? So that would be because the WordPress site that you installed didn't have a default mail configuration that on the server that WordPress could communicate with. So particularly if you're using like DigitalOcean or Linode or Vultr or one of the cloud providers for your WordPress site, which I recommend, you need to do this configuration yourself because WordPress doesn't have this email configuration set up automatically. So it's one of the things that you should do right away. And we'll talk about some ways that you can do that. But first, we'll talk about marketing email. So I mentioned you've got transactional and marketing. Marketing would be, something like, as you probably guessed, something involving like a mass email list or an email blast that goes out to a lot of people. That might be like a newsletter, an announcement, or some other kind of mass communication that goes out to a whole list of people rather than just like one specific email address. And the reason it's important to separate transactional and marketing email in your head, conceptually, is because they require some different protocols and like different types of server communications, or rather server configurations, and even like different delivery strategies depending on how big your list is. So in the same way, you wouldn't just like copy and paste a list of 100 people, like paste it into the to field of your email and then just send it out. You'd probably, get in trouble from whoever your email host is. That's why it's good to understand that there are marketing email services specifically that are geared to help you with that, and so they don't get your domain blacklisted or have your email blasts hit spam filters when they get delivered. And so for these different services, I like Postmark for transactional email and MailPoet for marketing emails. Both services have WordPress plugins, so they're easy to set up. You just install the plugin and use an API key. You may remember I mentioned a few slides back that there's transactional email, marketing email, and sometimes both. If you use MailPoet for email marketing, it can also do the transactional side as well. So if you're going to be sending out a newsletter or something like that, you can just install MailPoet, set it up, and if you get locked out of WordPress, you can request a password reset. All of the WordPress emails will hit your mailbox because they'll be handled by MailPoet's email servers. But of course, one of the nice things about Postmark, I'm not sure if MailPoet does this, but in terms of the transactional side of things, Postmark can give you some details about whether or not certain emails actually went out from the server and if they were delivered and if they were opened. You can get all that tracking data, so you can see that if something was delivered, and if you need to tell someone, oh hey, that's in your inbox, I see it was delivered, check your spam folder. Postmark gives you that kind of data, and I believe MailPoet does as well. I'm not sure if it's this detailed, but it could be something worth checking out. MailPoet will tell you after you've sent out a mass email how many people received it and like how many percentage of people who opened it or clicked a link. So you do get some data for sure. But that's about it. That is how you can get some extra advantage out of your business email. If I missed anything, or if there's any tips and tricks that you like that I neglected, be sure to let me know and leave any comments or questions you may have. But otherwise, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll talk to you all next time.